And today's broadcast is brought to you by Eclectic Horseman Magazine. Stay tuned for Eclectic Conversations hosted by Emily Kitching.
Thanks for joining me. I'm here today with Mike Bridges to visit about the re-release of his incredible book, The Art of Making a California-Style Bridle Horse. So thanks for joining me today, Mike.
How are you? Welcome. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I am so excited to. This book has been just beloved in the community of horse people, and it's a beautiful. The original was a beautiful color hardcover, beautiful book, and it's been out of print for a little bit, and so we got to visiting. Late last year about releasing it as a soft cover. And I'm super excited to say we're very near the finish line on that project.
Yeah, it is exciting. We get a lot of people have expressed interest in it, and it's been out of print now for a few years, and so I think it's good. It's to get that information back out there if for people that are interested in it. So
yeah, well,
the California discipline's a great discipline stand by itself, but it goes back to so much of the classical influence that was into the different cavalries and Spanish cavalry and the French cavalry and stuff, and so it was isolated, for like 270 years, and so it evolved into something very unique, but still with very good principles.
mm-hmm. Well, take us for a moment just back to the very beginning of what sparked your interest in this style of riding? Do you remember that when that fire got lit?
Well, I was raised in it. Uh, my mother's side of the family had a ranch between Madera and Fireball in California, and I would spend the summers up there. And I was raised in Southern California by the Santa Anita racetrack, and my father was in the motion picture industry, and so we were in there. But I would get sent to the ranch during the summers and some holidays, but always in the summer. Started mowing hay when I was 9 years old, and so been exposed to it through that at an early age, and we were only allowed to ride the old broke pensioner bridle horses, and as young kids, and you had to learn how to ride one before you ever could make one. So we as young kids, we were not allowed to ride anything that was in the development stages, only the old broke bridle horses, and so it was just part of my life. I didn't think anything of it, really. And then when I was 15, I went to Nevada and started buckarooing for a living, and I knew what a nice horse was because that's all I'd been riding, and not that I didn't have. They were not giving me bad horses to ride over there, but it didn't take much. I was getting my head stuck in the dirt almost every day, and so it pushed me to. I knew what a nice horse was. I didn't know. So how do I improve this? And so that's what really drove the quest of trying to ask questions and how do I make this better? And luckily, you hear people talk about that a lot of people didn't want to share their knowledge of how nice horses were made in this discipline. And that's not what I found at all.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everybody you'd ask a question to, and of course, when you're 15 and if somebody was 30, you thought they were older than dirt, And so I thought they were old guys, and there were some probably in their 40s and 50s. But they all would answer your question. I've only ran into a couple in my whole life that were guarded about what they knew. The rest were more than happy to help you, and so that's all of us that as we go forward, whatever we know at the moment, and if somebody wants part of that, you need to share it in some fashions, because that's how it gets passed down, is by sharing it. So I have tons of people that mentored me, especially in those younger years of to get better. They wanted to help you. They wanted to, and I wanted to know how to make this horse a little better, so that at the end of the day I wasn't quite so tired, wore out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And then that started that quest for me of how things are and why things, how do you do things, and what happens. And there's so many different roads to Rome. There's different attitudes about it and different ways to get it done. And when I started going to Europe and started meeting some of these classical guys, man, that opened another whole world of stuff. And when you start getting down to nuts and bolts of it, it's all pretty much the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about balance and creating balance and the ability to rebalance, and what do you do to get this horse better balanced. And so all the different disciplines, they all have value to make a nice horse. I've rode some horses in Europe that were every bit as light as any bridle horse I've ever made, and just exceptional, horses, because they were balanced. And so it's been a real good journey, but I think that from riding really broke horses when I was young, and that's the only thing we were allowed to ride, when I started working for a living and at a young age, and found out that they weren't all like that, that it started that quest of why, how.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Gosh, Mike, I have about 50 different questions I want to ask you, and I'm not quite sure where to go next, because you just gave me so many possibilities to go. Tell me a little bit about those horses that you rode growing up. Like, and in your experience in training bridle horses, or building bridle horses, I love that term, by the way. Do you think it changes how the horse feels about himself when he becomes a bridle horse?
well, I think certainly not just bridle horse. Any horse that's well trained and within any discipline, you will see them use that learned behavior when they're out on their own. If they're loose in a field or interacting with other horses, you'll see them use that learned behavior. Movements within that they have been schooled on, and first taught and then schooled on, and as it gets to a higher level of balance, and from the balance is where speed comes. As they get better balance, just like an athlete, then they can do it faster. And so you see them using that when they're socially interacting with other horses, and certainly in my discipline, but all disciplines, and you see it. And they will use it. Just yeah.
Yeah, cool. I love another piece in the book. I think you talked about early on was the language that you grew up with, and then hearing you talk about going to Europe. Like, was that a huge, like, what was the learning curve like there in adding from your language and learning the new language?
It was a big deal. It started on the East Coast. I got invited back. A great horseman named Frank Barnett came out, and we met. He he came out and took a private spade bit clinic on a weekend, and wanted to learn more about the spade, wanted to learn something about it, and thought it might help him in rehabbing horses. And and then he was going to stay 3 days, ended up staying a week, and then invited me back there to do a clinic. And so, a bridle horse clinic and a bridling clinic. And he had 39 professionals there of different disciplines. And this is like almost 30 years ago now. And it was, I think, one of the best clinics I've ever done, because they asked such good questions, and so all I had was my colloquial language that I grew up with around ranches, and so like you'd say, check your horse. Well, that's in essence a check is a half halt, but I didn't even know what the word half halt was, so partway through this clinic, the second day, partway through the morning, in the later part of the morning, this lady stood up. Her name's Celeste Urick, and she's an extremely good horsewoman, and she's a jump rider, and she was actually trained by Carl Macoca of the Spanish Riding School, who's first head rider of Spanish Riding School for a number of years, and one of the first from the Spanish Riding School that ended up here in the United States. And her husband brought her over, and she really knowledgeable. She stands up and she says, we know what you're talking about, but your language sucks. She says, you have some really good things to say, but by the way you say them, you're going to turn off a lot of people that have some knowledge. And she says, there is a set of international words that mean the same thing wherever you go. And it needs to be expressed that way if you're going to interact with people that may be coming from a different way. And so, I mean, that really, kind of punctured my balloon quite a bit. And so it went on that deal. And then her husband came over, Richard, later during a break. And he says, when we're done, you and Frank are going to come over to the house for dinner, and Celeste is going to ride a third level horse and start introducing you. She'll do a movement, and you'll say what you call it, like Travers, we called it, you just hip in. You just riding it hip in. And she says she'll do a movement. You'll say what it is. She'll tell you what's the formal deal. And that started my education. And so for a number of years, they worked on me to get better about my language. And Frank Barnett helped me understand it better, and Richard and Celeste Urick really helped me a lot before I ever went to Europe, and to understand it. And so I had a little start of it, and trying to be more correct about how I talked, and so other people would know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to Europe, it just expanded, because then I got exposed to more of those people, and I wasn't so incorrect with my language. Mm-hmm. And then I got better and better at it. And it's an ongoing thing of trying to learn to be able to talk to your audience wherever you are and make sense to them, so that it's so try not to use some colloquial language anymore. still creeps in once in a while. I mean, we are what we are.
Yeah.
And
Well,
but those people really helped me, and it changed how I taught and stuff. And then in Europe, I taught in Europe for 28 years, and uh, which was a really blessing in that as far as my own personal learning curve. And so I had to use interpreters over there,
hmm
and I was lucky I had some really good ones, and that stayed with me for a lot of years. A couple of them the whole time that I taught there, they did it, and they would make you be more correct
hmm
also.
hmm
And uh, so
Well,
it,
yeah, because the words really matter. I mean, they carry so much with them when you're trying to
yes,
communicate.
right. They could mean the same in Germany or England or Japan or Australia or any place you go. Uh, the classical words mean the same.
hmm hmm
Yeah, the same thing. Right.
So when you were in Europe and you're teaching bridle horse, traditional California bridle horse process, like why do you think, like it always is amazing to me that it's so beloved around the world. I mean, people here really have an affinity for it, and people around the world, it ignites something in them. Like what has your experience been? Like, I'm sure you've thought about why it appeals to people.
Well, I think uh, it it has a class about it because of the equipment and the look of from that old time. It was a unique look, and the horses are so graceful and in their work. I used to do some clinics down in Texas, down by College Station, Navasota, Texas, and I went to a museum there, uh, uh, Washington on the Brazos
Hmm.
River, which it's about the Texas history. That was the when it was the Republic of Texas. That was the place, and in that history, there is, the Texas was some guys from Texas were the first who drove cattle to California, and I don't remember the dates now, and they drove cattle to California, and of course when they got there, California was full of cattle, but they came back and they marveled so much about the ability of the vaquero horses. It's written in their history that these horses that were so brave that they could get them close enough to rope bears with, and they were so handy in how they could turn and stop and do these things. And it was written in that Texas history
Mm-hmm.
there that was so impressive. And I think that's people see that, and they like it. And the uh, this is a horse that has a job, a working cattle.
Mm-hmm.
It has a job to do, and the interaction I think between the horse and the cattle, uh, uh, people really get it. And look where the cutting industry has gone. The cutting horse industry has gone. It is extremely popular and stuff because of the movement that these horses can make and the interaction with the cattle. And so I think it's that the costume, all of it together, I think has made it um, desirable to people from an aesthetic point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people that they all disciplines that uh, strive to reach high performance, whatever they're jump horses or barrel racing horses or cow working horses. All of them are just take time, take a lot of time. most people don't realize the time involved with it, that it takes to get a horse to the high performance, whether it is a California Vaquero horse or a Grand Prix jumping horse,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you're asking different things of the horse, but the same things are required to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the deal. And
yeah. Well, and there's a certain amount of I don't know. I guess for me, I see it just the honoring of the horse through the process too, where you're elevating his education and making those the gear transitions in a way that's through success and not through failure. I for lack of a better term.
well, they just the horse does buy into it. Into
Mm-hmm.
the horse buys into good training,
Yeah.
regardless of what kind of good training it is.
Mm-hmm.
And for our kind of horses, they get more elegant in their carriage, and especially kind of the horses we're riding today, these more quarter horses, their necks kind of come out of their shoulders pretty flat. And they don't have much elevation, but if you're going to collect the body of the horse, regardless of what you want to do, you've got to be able to elevate the neck and engage the hip to bring the body together, and a lot of the work requires some degrees of collection in this California type cow working horse.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get done, you have this. They used to talk about describing these old California horses that they're going down on a loose rein with this crane, neck like a crane, up in the air with this elegant head carriage and neck up and face falling towards the vertical as they're going along on loose rein. Well, and it is very elegant when it happens, but it takes time for that to get there. That doesn't happen in 6 months or a
No.
year or
No.
2 years.
Yeah.
But if you don't, if the training doesn't describe to go there, well, you don't ever get there.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think in the book you do such an incredible job of, like, you've touched all the pieces, right? So you're talking about how the horse feels, how it feels to the rider, the gear. I mean, some things focus more heavily on one of those aspects, and I think that this text really does a great job of having like a balance of all the components that you need to move forward.
well, thank you. That's I must say that it took me 10 years. It took 10 years to write that book,
I
and I
believe it.
had 5 other horsewomen and men from different disciplines. There was 5 of them, 1 woman, 4 men. A woman was a dressage rider, and had been a student of mine and switched to dressage and did extremely well. And the others were from different disciplines. And we each draft of the book they went through and read, and we did 7 drafts before the final one. I did not want to write something that 10 years later I was going to be disappointed with, or 20 years later. I wanted it to be correct, and so I'm glad I did it that way. So it was a collaboration of these people, and I've acknowledged them they're acknowledged in the book. And that was a big thing, getting the sounding board of these different people that came from different perspectives. See, so you could take that book and you could develop a horse for any discipline, really, with the stuff that's in that book as far as your movements would be different. What you would teach for movements,
Mm-hmm.
but it's pretty correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and not knowing, not knowing that the work really is, you feel that in reading it. You feel the time. It's just like with the horses. You took the time to get it right, because it is, there's not a word out of place.
Well, thank you. That's pretty darn nice. I wrote
Well,
I wrote it all out in longhand.
Wow. Well, I've read a lot of books, and I really enjoyed this one a lot, and I just marveled at how full of a picture that you created. I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit about, there were a few different things that maybe we could visit about. Could you talk a little bit about one of the things that you talk about is classically trained versus traditionally trained? And I thought that was an interesting concept. Maybe you could visit a little bit about that.
Yeah. I always thought I was, or I perceived myself to be a traditional. I wasn't a purist. I'm not a purist as far as my discipline. If I can find things from other disciplines that I feel will help me make a better horse, man, I'm all for it. And so, but a traditionalist is one that teaches within their own discipline. And so what you learn, or how you teach, how you learn to teach something within that discipline, and you perpetrate that from horse to horse. That's a traditional way of doing it. So I did a lot of things the way that I was taught by the people that mentored me to do it. And so that you do a number of horses, and that becomes traditional.
Okay.
Or using a two rein, when you start the horse into the bridle, you switching from the hackamore to a two rein and a bridle in their mouth, where you have four reins. That's two rein is traditional to the California discipline. And then, so I always thought of myself as a traditional guy, a traditional California guy that taught traditional principles. And I still feel that way to deal, but I've had people in Europe say that you're classical.
Mm-hmm.
Those principles are actually classical principles, and the California discipline, because it came from Spain and its influence was through the Spanish cavalry primarily, and that influence came from the French court actually at Versailles. And trickles down through the military, French military and the Spanish military. There's the California traditional disciplines has a lot of classical stuff in it, or a lot of classical principles in it. There's things in some of the old type of training, like if you read Rojas and some of the old guys that were down around Bakersfield and the Tejon Ranch and the San Emilio Ranch and stuff, where a lot of great horsemen came out of those crews there, and that was one of the hotbeds. But how they started horses there wasn't necessarily the only way. Where they talk about running those horses off to the end of the hackamore and then busting them back. That certainly was done. That certainly, and they were very successful with it. But I was raised 120 miles north of that, Madera, and where I was raised, it wasn't that way. It was more a lot of in-hand work at first, and so what was traditional one place was not necessarily traditional someplace else, and not that one was better than the other. They're just different ways to get to the same, the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Cool. Thank you. The other two pairs of words I wanted to visit about was sometimes you talk about building a bridle horse and then sometimes making a bridle horse, and maybe you want to talk about some of the nuances between those two different ideas.
For me, the words are the same. It just depends on you. Building them is you, and that's this 6-year project I have for people that they commit for 6 years to make a bridle horse or be someplace in the process at the end of 6 years. Tell them you may not be there. You may be in the 2 rein. You may not be in the 2 rein at the end of that. You may, but it's how you go through this process, the steps. So this 6-year deal is the sequence I build a horse in, and I want them to understand why that sequence is. You need to have this step in before you have the next step, so that if you get in trouble with that one, you have some place to come back to. But that sequence is not cast in stone, in that you would not alter it depending on the personality of an individual horse, and want them to understand that within that also, that each horse's personality may present things to you that you may jump ahead to something that you want, that you feel it needs to be in there before. So
cool. Thank you. Yeah.
It's that kind of a thing, that you don't lock yourself down to do that. It has to be this way, but there's a logical reason that you need to have this in before you do that. So like for me, I want a really good shoulder in on a horse before I try to get travers or start working on travers or renvers, hip in or hip out. Because when you straightness is forward, and straightness are big things. So shoulder in, you're straight through a diagonal. It's very straight movement. I'm a big advocate of shoulder in, and so say you go shoulder in, leg yield, and when those are really good, we'll then start deviating that hip, because when you start deviating the hip in, you are no longer straight at that moment, and you are straight through the diagonal. You can be straight through that diagonal, but that hip now is, one hip is not behind the scapula of the shoulder. It is deviated to the inside or the outside of that movement. So some horses will give you that. Some horses, travers can be an easy movement for them, and you get your leg back there, they start giving you travers, but it's not a good travers where that hip is engaging from the lumbosacral joint. They move the hip in from behind the withers, which is not a correct travers. So one of the you should feel the horse wrap around your leg. The rib should stay there. The hip should come in. The whole rib shouldn't move over in travers. So so a horse may offer you that, and you may think you have it, but you don't really have it. So if you don't have, for me, if I don't get a really good shoulder in where I can, walk that shoulder in, a good collected walk, and trot the shoulder in. I may not be cantering it yet, but trot it real good, and it can extend or shorten the trot. Now I'm ready, because I got control of that mid body to where I can keep the thoracic area in line and get the hip to move in from the lumbosacral joint.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. So if I get ahead of myself, it may come back and haunt you. A guy told me, a friend that I have from, his name's Desmond O'Brien, and he was at Spanish riding school 28 years. He was 28 years, and when he left there, he was the head saddler, and which the head saddler is the guy that says what equipment should be used on a horse at a certain part of the training. And he's a master, really a great guy. And he says, you want to be really careful how you train your young horse, that it doesn't come back and bite you when you start pushing towards advanced work.
Mm-hmm.
What you do with the young horse should prepare him to enhance what you're going to push him into in the advanced work, not where you have to redo it because you set something up in deal. What set this up? I used to do lots and lots of hip in. I mean, lots and lots of hip in. I almost never did any or very little hip out or renvers.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I didn't know the words. It was just hip in or hip out. See, and because hip in was a really good way to young horse to set them up to get a inside canter depart, and or turnaround. You turn around work. Hip in's exaggerated position of turnaround, of our type inside pivot foot turnaround. And I used to use it a lot. See, and so when I first started going to Europe, and I got around those guys, and I'd hardly ever see anybody doing travers. They were all doing renvers. And it was almost 3 years before I asked the question. I don't know why the hell I didn't be smart enough to ask the questions. And so I said, you guys are always doing renvers. How come you don't use travers? He says, you don't want to push the engine in the direction of your movement. It may come back and haunt you later when you start trying to teach flying changes. Boy, and the light bulb went off, just like that. And because I'd had a number of horses, that when I started teaching flying changes, they on one, especially one side or the other, they would be late. See, well, that hip has, if they get habituated to cantering hip in, then you can run in this problem where you, in that flying change, that hip has to move further than it can maintain its balance in the air to make the change, and you start dragging the back lead, or it changes in the front and the back is way late, or the back doesn't change at all, those kind of problems.
Mm-hmm.
And just little things like that. See, that if you can get ahead of yourself in the training. And so that was a big light bulb moment for me when he said that you want to be real cautious about how you prepare the young horse so that it helps him when you start pushing him to the advanced work and doesn't become a detriment to you.
Yeah. Wow. And then, and that's where having help, like a book like this or somebody helping you with experience can sort of help you make those mistakes yourself.
That's why you can learn from everybody.
Yeah.
You learn from everybody if you want to learn. And I mean, all of us, we're all trying to learn more and trying to be better than we were. And we all only know what we know in the moment, but you got to ask the questions.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to get out of your sandbox.
That's for sure. Yeah. Well, Mike, I feel like I could ask you a bazillion questions, but was there anything that, and hopefully this won't be the only time we get to visit, was there anything that I didn't ask you about that you feel like would be good for us to talk about, especially in relation to this book coming back out in print?
Well, nothing I could think of at the moment, but really excited about this book being able to come out in the soft copy and be reasonable where people can get it, and it's really good. Good deal.
Good.
I really appreciate the work you've done on it to get it out. If you hadn't stepped up, it wouldn't have happened.
Well, I'm super proud to be a part of it, and I feel like, yeah, I think this is going to be a copy that folks can take out to the arena with them, or keep in the tack room for reference, because it'll be easy to have it right there.
Yeah.
Not on the coffee table, out in the barn. So, yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time, and I'll include the information down below where folks can learn more about ordering the book, and we'll hope to visit with you again soon.
Okay, you betcha. You betcha.